Hey everyone, welcome back to City Skylines 2. Or, if you're new, welcome. Today I'm very happy to be collaborating with Paradox Interactive to try out the brand new US East Coast region pack, available for free right now on Paradox Mods. I probably sound a little bit more upbeat than usual today, and that's because this has given me the opportunity to try something that I've really wanted to do for a long time. I'm so used to doing a longer format series like Grunstadt and Maria Slava, but what I've really wanted to do for quite a while is to just see if I could make a full city in one episode, or so to say, a one-take city. I've always felt that this would be a fun challenge because, although there's less of a commitment, you're not doing something, a couple dozen episodes long, you are still trying to build a full city in one episode, and there's a bit of a trade-off there, right? You're not doing detailing as much, but you still have to focus on the actual structure of the city. So either way, it's something new for me, but it'll be fun and it'll be a learning experience, and we'll see how it goes. So I decided to build this city on the Barrier Islands map. It felt fitting, being a coastal map and by the ocean, so I thought it would complement the East Coast region pack well. I think it's technically set somewhere closer to the equator because there's no snow. Like even in the winter, it's above zero. But to me, that's an upside because I actually don't like dealing with snow too much. I get enough of that in Canada already. The idea with this map was, it has that big island right in the middle, and I thought that was perfect, and I would just build that island out as the build for this video. Now it might have been a little bit easier said than done, as we'll see, but we'll get there one thing at a time. So like I said, I haven't done anything like this, or at the very least on this scale before. And I figured that the best way to approach this would be just to be very methodical about it and start with the backbone, like I usually do. So I'm starting with the highways, and the very first thing I'm doing with the highways is building out all the interconnections to the actual mainland. And before I get too far ahead of myself, yes, that was the Golden Gate Bridge from the West Coast being used in an East Coast build. I know, okay? I know it's a West Coast bridge. I just needed a cool bridge, and it looks cool, okay? So I know it's a West Coast bridge. Just go with it for now. I think I ended up building a total of like 5 bridges, if you count the 3 that the very last one is made up of, just because it's spanning quite a distance. But I started with those so that I would know where I would connect up all the highways that I'm going to be building on this island. Now, I actually kind of approached this similarly to how I approached my episode of the first global collab that I did, and I actually made a little sketch of how the highways on the island would go, just because I had to plan this out a little bit ahead of time, because like I said, I'm trying to do something with quite a large scope in a short amount of time. And from that sketch, I knew that I wanted to have this highway running nearby to the coast that all the other highways from the bridges would connect up to. So that's what I'm doing here. You saw I terraformed a little bit first because, being a barrier island, there's a big terrain barrier there, and it's a nice spot to build a highway on, but it just had to be flattened out a little bit first. So that's what I did, and then here I'm cleaning up afterwards to make it look a little bit more natural. Now, I think by this point, many of you have seen what the runtime of this video is. I think this is the longest video I've ever made, which is both exciting and daunting at the same time. So I just want to give a heads up that, if it's a pretty long video, but I did subdivide it into different sections based on what I'm doing. So if you want to skip ahead to a certain part, feel free to do that. But in the meantime, we're just getting things set up. So when we zone everything, we'll have the necessary structures in place to support the city. So the bridges I built over the channel between the mainland and the island here have to be something like 40 meters to clear the ship channel there. And that presents a bit of a challenge when you want them to feed directly into the city without having, like a 2 kilometer long ramp up to them. So what I decided to do here is this kind of janky spiral that just spirals down to, I think I settled on like 10 meters for the elevated highway here. And that just really reduced the footprint of what the ramp up to the, or I guess the approach up to the bridge would be. So I'd say the highways aren't anything too crazy. Like I said, I had it planned out before, so I knew I wanted them to go. The first big challenge, aside from the bridge ramps, is actually getting them all connected up. And I'm not talking about actual connections to the city with ramps and stuff. I'm talking about changing between the different highways. So building those interchanges out was the next thing that I'm tackling here. Now this video is long enough as is, so I'm skipping out a lot of footage, especially where I connected the bridges up to the mainland highway. And I mostly did that with just a ton of trumpet interchanges because they have a pretty small footprint, so you can fit them anywhere, and they're pretty simple in design. But for this one here, I wanted it to be a little bit more special, and it does have to be a 4-way, so trumpet wasn't really going to cut it there. This one's also interesting because we're going from a sunken highway, which eventually goes to level ground, but we're connecting that up to an elevated highway, so we do have that elevation difference. What I ended up settling on for this particular interchange was to do something like vaguely like a cloverleaf. We are in what will be the city, so I am trying to keep the space pretty efficiently used, and I figured that right here that would be a pretty good way to do that. I've been using the complex curve tool for this quite a bit. I'm not sure how I ever survived without it in City Skylines 1, to be honest, because it's so nice to do these I don't know what you would call them, like semicircular patterns like you see I just did there. It's also great when you have two parallel roads but they're not in line with each other, so you can just make that little S-curve to connect them. Yeah, definitely got a lot of mileage out of that one. So as I said, it's not exactly a cloverleaf. I thought I was being really clever by doing something different with the ramps and maybe making something new. But actually, as it turned out, I just wasn't servicing every direction that traffic would need to go. So I did have to end up changing it later, and you'll see that in the cinematic in a second. But once I was done with this, I just kind of cleaned up the area. But yeah, wasn't my best work because I did have to fix it later. So the other and arguably more interesting interchange I did is this one between one of these sunken highways and the coastal highway we have running up along the hill. For this one, because the tunnel portals for the sunken highway are so far apart from the coastal highway that runs over them, I basically just had to take a cloverleaf and extend it out. So it ended up kind of looking just like a really long cloverleaf. But I think that ended up making it look quite unique, and I think it's probably the favorite interchange of mine that I did this episode. The very first interchange I did actually was this 4-level stack interchange off the Golden Gate Bridge, and for me it was kind of a warm-up, so I didn't record it because just trying to get up to speed and remember best practices and stuff like that. And it was a nightmare to do, so I'm glad I didn't record it, but I think that one ended up being pretty interesting too, just because of its size and complexity. But even still, I think this one, just because of how unique it ended up looking, it's probably my favorite. The big downside with cloverleafs is the weaving that you have to do where the on and off ramps are. But surprisingly, it actually ended up not being too big of a problem. I think probably because the coastal highway didn't end up being too crazily trafficked. And actually, most of the traffic problems that I ended up having, that you'll see later, were at the diamond interchanges that I did for the actual connections into the city. But I just thought that was kind of funny because it's always where you never expect. Because I really did think that this would be a bottleneck, but it ended up not being a problem. Now, while I'm working on this, I figured I'd ask, or I guess bring to attention the fact that I guess it's technically not a one-take city, right? Because I have multiple takes, multiple clips. It's just that I'm doing it in one episode, which I guess means I could technically just put 4 episodes worth of content in a single one, which I guess is kind of what I did here, but I did it in the same time span as that I would do one episode in. So that was the difference for me. But I don't have like a naming scheme yet. So it's One Take City, but I don't know what I'm going to call the next one. One Take City 2. So if anybody has any ideas on that, feel free to leave that below. Otherwise, I'll figure something out. I guess something else that I should clarify about the OTC, and I'm not talking about an overtime contingency here, is that it's not that I'm burnt out. I do a lot of writing for some of the other projects that I work on, and sometimes it's just really nice to get away from the main script for a little bit after working on that for so long and just write a little short story, off to the side, maybe some ancillary thing or some side characters or different location. And it's refreshing. It gives you, I guess, time to switch gears for a little bit and get a breath of fresh air. So that's largely what this is to me. I love Myriaslav. I'm still very committed to that city, but I mentioned in my 10K video, for example, that I've had ideas like for stuff like this that I want to do, and so this just lets me try, for example, a different theme. Instead of doing a European city, I get to work on a North American one for just a little bit, and I guess get it out of my system. Anyways, with the highways done, apart from the actual city connections, it was finally time to put down some of the main buildings. So the first one was the train station, since it's pretty large and there's additional infrastructure we need for it, right? We need to build the rails, and there's a little bit of planning that needs to go into that. So I decided to tunnel the train tracks underground, and I'm using these quad tracks that I made with Road Builder, and that's partly because one, there's no good train bridge asset yet, I guess I should say, and two, just to change things up a little bit. Now the quad tracks are actually really nice, but the only slight problem they have is that I guess when you go into tunnel mode with them, at every single node they make one of those diamonds where all the different tracks can connect to each other. So I just removed those where I needed to with the lane connector tool, I think it is. Something nice about the lane system in this game, though, and how it works with the lane connector tool, is that you can sort of customize crossovers how you want. So you saw there that I removed a bunch of tracks, but I still left a number of others just so that the trains could still, cross over if they wanted to. So it lets you have switches in certain places. For this city, I decided not to have an inner city train system just because it didn't really make sense. Instead, I just have this terminus station, and that lets the city connect to the rest of the world. This map has 2 train connections on either side of the map, so the quad track was perfect for that because then I could just have it split up in each direction and have the different train lines segregated in that way. The station I put down here is actually from the Modern Architecture pack, and actually later on I'll be using some other buildings from it as well. The East Coast pack has a ton of buildings, like mainly zonables, plus the signature buildings, and actually a number of service buildings, but a train station is not one of them. But I think that's fine actually, because the Modern Architecture station kind of fits any city. You could stick it in a European one or even an urban city like this one. And in general for this build, I just felt it fit the city better than the vanilla one. Not that I hate that one, but I think just the more blocky architecture of this one made more sense given the buildings you'll see later. The rail yard takes up quite a bit of space as well, so I made sure to put that down beforehand so I could plan around it. Alright, so with the highways in place and our train station where we want it, I could finally start on the actual road layout. Now, I don't know if it's a bug or why the game is like this, but the terrain shadows on sunken roads, like next to retaining walls, are really bad. And I don't know why, because if you remove them it's fine, and otherwise the terrain shadow is pretty good. But I really didn't like it, so I try to avoid using them where I can. And instead, I thought I would just put roads that run along the side of either highway, and I'm using keys on those, so that way you still get that retaining wall technically, but instead they're next to a road instead of just being part of the highway. And a little pro tip, if you're trying to do this, just upgrade one of your highways to a zonable road first. They're the same size, or at least the 2-lane city road is the same as the 3-lane highway in width. So you can upgrade it and you'll get a zoning grid, and then you can do what I did here and just put down a couple segments, especially in between curves like this, and then you can just draw a curve in between those. It's just a good way to get things lined up, I guess. Now, unfortunately, having the train tracks here and the highways too, it kind of segregates the different parts of our map. So I made sure to build some flyovers so that people could get across, and you'll see me do that with the highways as well. There's going to be a ton of roads crossing them back and forth. Technically there doesn't need to be this many tracks. I ended up only having 2 lines, so I think just one platform would have been enough with 2 sets of tracks, but that's neither here nor there. And either way, it looks cool, which is a big part of this as well. So that overpass ended up becoming, I guess, the first main road of the island. And I think it is actually the main road because it spans the whole length of the island. And actually, it's only 4 lanes. So I don't think I ended up using any 6-lane roads in this city. So that goes to show lanes ain't everything. But yeah, this is actually following a different sketch that I did for the main road specifically. So again, I have a little bit of a plan for that. And, you know, I think if you are approaching something of this magnitude, it is very helpful to do something like that. And I mean, I even do that in Bratislava sometimes. Maybe I don't physically draw it, but I have a decent idea in my head of how I'm going to do it. And speaking of ideas, I had this pretty clear picture in my head of this other coastal highway, and it's this little 2-lane thing I have running right along the beach. You know, I know we have the big highway there, but then this one would actually be, I guess, part of the city road network. And then what I do later on with it is I'll have like beach houses and stuff like that. So I don't know, it kind of reminded me when I was in Florida, there's some places with just little 2-lane roads like this, you know, like near Cape Canaveral on those really thin strips of land. And I know this isn't quite like this, but I wanted to evoke that same feeling, especially of like, you know, houses right on the highway. I think that's a very interesting thing to have. Okay, so it's time for the meat of the road layout, and that's actually building out the grid that everything will be based on. For a lot of this, I'm just using the grid tool, which I actually haven't really had too much opportunity to use yet in Bratislava, just because I'm not really using the same kind of grid there. But yeah, I'm just dragging this out to the max dimensions it'll go. It's like around, I think, 208 by 112 units. So, you know, it's a bit finicky every time you drag it out. You have to sort of get to that point, right, where it'll, you know, add a new column or a new row, and then you just go back just so it'll, you know, make something the right size. But it does save a lot of time, I think, especially in open areas like this where you have room for just a regular grid that doesn't need any tweaking. And I have to say, it really is much more convenient working with a grid-based road system versus, you know, like a Eurogrid or something more organic. It saves so much time. It's so much easier to place buildings in a way that's dense and that fits. Definitely one of the big advantages to doing this little one-take city. No, I'm not just building out one giant grid that the entire city will be on. It's more of a collection of grids. And so you have a bunch of main roads basically splitting those up. So you can see here I dragged out a road that I wanted to go through that valley up there, through the underpass, and I'm just deleting all the roads past it. And this basically lets the road act as a nice breaking point between different groups of grids. And the reason we're doing, you know, these different groups of grids is because if you've ever looked at a grid-based city, you know, especially American ones like in New York or Chicago or something, it's not just one grid. It's a collection of different grids, and they're at slightly different angles or slightly different sizes. I think I went with just one size grid here, like I'm using the 208 by 112 dimensions I mentioned earlier, but I will be angling them around so that it looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, I mentioned Chicago, and then I went to look at it to double check it, and it's actually the worst possible example I could have used, because it literally is all one grid. So forget that, but if you look at East Coast cities, which makes sense, given this video, so New York, Philadelphia, Washington, hell, even Montreal in Canada, if you want to count that, they have those different groups of grids. So that's really what I'm basing it on. Now, as I started doing this, I kind of started to realize the scale of this city. It is kind of deceiving looking at, just a big island before you put any roads on it. But yeah, as I started building this out, I started to realize how massive the city was going to be. And I think by the end of this, it ended up being like 300,000 people. So not bad for one episode. But these grids, as you can see, I'm using the grid tool for the bulk of it. So, in the big open spaces, I'll use the grid tool to make the main grid. And then I'll supplement it with manual work and, actually connect it up. Sometimes there's, a little bit of terraforming that needs to be done so that you get around hills and you don't have, super crazy elevation differences. But for the most part, it was just rinse and repeat, Up here, I'm connecting one of the main roads to our coastal highway, and I'm just doing that, in a pretty basic manner. I have the central 2 lanes become left turn only, but then the right lanes become slip lanes, just to ease the traffic there. I think by this point I had done most of the grid on the south part of the island, or at least south from this orientation. I actually don't know what's north, what's south. And I think the season changed as well, because you can see the color correction changed. And I've always wondered if I was imagining that. Like, I've had this happen to me when I was working on Media Slava, but after looking through this footage and actually seeing the color grading change, I guess I finally confirmed it for myself. But anyways, before I did the northern part of the grid, I wanted to get this train turnaround done first, since that took a bunch of space. And that's really was just more of a way to nicely terminate those train tracks. I don't end up using it, but I figured it was nice to have there, and you could imagine certain trains that would have one-way consists would need a way to turn around like this. But luckily, all the trains in City Skylines 2 are double-ended, and they have locomotives on either end, so it is convenient. In some places, it just really is easier to do the grid manually, kind of like here, because you really have that coastal terrain, so you can't quite butt up a grid up to it nicely with the grid tool, so I'm just dragging things out myself. And that just lets me extend the roads to, as far as they can in one go. So that's the grid done. And at this point, it was time to actually connect it up to our highway system. I didn't want to do anything too fancy with this. I know there's more efficient ways to do this with, ramps smoothly leading into roads and such. But I decided to just go with diamond interchanges everywhere, basically. That's what I see the most often, at least here in Ottawa. That's what we use quite a lot. So that's what I decided to use here. Diamonds are nice as well because at this point I was pretty sick of doing highway work. I spent so much time on that in the beginning, and diamonds are very quick and easy. Just a couple ramps, then you drag them down to the actual main roads that they're connecting to, and you're pretty much done. And they're also very compact, which is great in an urban environment where you want to maximize your land usage for more important things. I'm also including some footage here of how I did the diamonds for the sunken highways. I didn't actually do it on the other sunken highway, but I did do some diamonds here. It's pretty much the same process, but just with it being sunken, you're basically just going the other way. The challenge here was just because I have those roads along the side is, what I do with those. So what I ended up doing is actually just expanding them outwards, away from the highway to make room for the ramps coming in, and then I put them back close enough that where the ramps intersect the road and where these borderline roads intersect, they all kind of just form one big intersection. And that's another feature I kind of forgot about. When I was connecting up the grids earlier, and I think it was near a main road where I was trying to connect one grid angled one way to another one angled a different way. And I just kind of realized, even though they're offset a little bit, you can still get them to form one intersection. And that was really nice because those are a real thing. You can see those in quite a few places. But you really couldn't do something like that in City Skylines 1. Anyways, with the roads hooked up to the highways now, that was the road system essentially done. So, it took quite a bit of work, but hopefully, once we actually get some real traffic going on it, it'll pay off. There's still a couple of things to do before we actually zone things and have proper car traffic. One of those being building the subway system. I felt like a subway was kind of a no-brainer for a city like this, especially since we don't have inner-city train service. The subways would supplement that, and so we'd have lines going basically from one end of the island to the other. And that is what I ended up doing. I ended up running it right along the main road, since that's where I expected I would zone, or I guess not expected, but where I planned to zone most of the businesses and the high density offices and stuff like that. So I think they're in the best spot. They're right, in the middle. I did loop one line around down to here, since it was a little bit wider than the rest of the island. And that's kind of taken from Toronto's playbook, I guess. But, don't worry, we'll have subways as well. I didn't end up doing any trams just because they're not too common in northeastern cities, I guess especially in America, even though I do like them. But I figured I'd supplement the subways with some bus lines going sort of across, transverse to the subway lines, so you'll see me doing that later. Building out the subway system before we zone everything out has two advantages. Number one, we can do a little bit of transit-oriented development and zone things based on where the stations are. And number two, it just kind of prevents us from deleting buildings later on, so we can put our stations where we want them without having to worry about demolishing stuff. And that's the same reason why you'll see me putting down the service buildings beforehand as well. Now, all the stations I've currently put down are one platform, but I realized later on that these modern architecture subway stops actually support upgrades, and so you can upgrade them with a second platform, and you'll see me do that a little bit later. Okay, so now, only 35 minutes into the video, we can finally put down some of the buildings from the Northeast pack. I was pretty excited about this because this was actually my first look at the buildings as well. And I started off with the hospital here, since it is a pretty large building and it needs a large area to accommodate it. And it really is a quite pretty building. It has very interesting architecture. I'm not sure what it's based on. But it actually does support upgrades, so you can upgrade it with some extra wings and a helicopter pad, which I think is pretty cool. I think most of the service buildings in this pack actually have upgrades, if not all of them. The clinic is really nice as well. It's a very compact little building that kind of fits into anywhere. And I was just kind of going through the services one by one. So next up was the main fire station. And I'm putting all these like headquarter buildings near the geographic downtown of the city, or I guess where I was planning to have the downtown anyways. And then I'm putting all the other smaller buildings just around the map. I don't really have a particular pattern, just kind of putting them where I think they make sense and where I hope it'll be sufficient to cover the whole map. The local fire station is nice because it just takes up one row. It's a 1x4 building, I think. So if you have row houses like you'll see later on, it fits really nicely into there. Same with the local police station, actually. Next up was the police headquarters, and I also put this in the downtown area. I don't think I ended up having any problems really with police or fire. I know I had to upgrade healthcare, so I think the clinics and the hospital later on, but I don't think I ever had to touch police and fire, which is unfortunate because it would have been nice to see all the upgrades to them. Now the emergency trio, so healthcare, fire, police, I wasn't too worried about, but in my experience playing this game, there's never enough schools. Like, no matter how many schools you put down, it seems like there's always more students. So I tried to get ahead of the curve and put down quite an abundance of them, but I should have known better because I did have to come back and upgrade them later on. Either way, they're really nice buildings, and I think one of the things that impresses me the most about this pack is just how well all the buildings fit together. They're such a consistent style, so that was really nice. Now, schools aren't the only thing I had an abundance of. I went really overkill with the crematoriums, just expecting a death wave, and I was really hoping that would be enough to cover us with any issues, but foreshadowing can be a very subtle literary device. Now, even though I was planning on having pumps, I still had to put down this very Luminesque water tower. I feel like that's such a quintessential part of Northeast cities. Like I don't live on the Northeast coast, but at least on the eastern side of Canada, it's pretty common when you're driving into like a small town to see those. So I really liked having that. For the water pumps themselves, I'm using these advanced pumping stations, I think they're called, because I am playing on Unlocked All with infinite money. I guess maybe I haven't mentioned that. I am playing on infinite money. I didn't really want to worry about money. I just kind of wanted to build a city. So that was the idea here. Technically, you're only allowed to build one of these in a city. And actually, I'm not quite sure why, because they are really handy and they fit this environment so well. But just using Anarchy, I overrode that and I built a second one. And right next to it, I'm building it, the water treatment plant. So the water treatment plant and our pumping stations take care of water and sewage, but we still had to hook everything up to the grid. So for now, I wasn't really going to bother with putting down a power plant, so I just put down a substation and connected it to the transmission lines that already exist in the map. So I guess that's technically will be importing electricity. But later on, I did end up building a nuclear power plant, actually, just off to the side. Very haphazard. I didn't detail it or anything. I don't think I even show it in this video, but it is there to help out our city. I also upgraded a bunch of the highways that were near the urban parts of our city with sound walls. Unfortunately, you can't do it to elevated sections of road, which would have been really nice because we do have a number of elevated highways, but that's not the end of the world, and we're still putting these where we can. Hopefully that'll just make our citizens' lives a little bit less noisy. And the very last thing I did before zoning is making these subway and train lines. And you can see here what I was talking about, the second platforms for the subways. And that's just because we have two lines. So we have the one that loops around and then this one that goes all the way to the other end of the island. And doing these before zoning just makes sure that these are available from the get-go for people. And then here you can also see I did the two inner city train lines. All right, halfway through the video, and we're so close to actually having people in our city. We finally get to zoning, and I'm not gonna lie, I was just seeing what sticks here. I didn't have like a huge plan for how we should be zoning everything. I knew that I wanted a lot of offices, so especially here downtown, I have a big office zone. I kept most of the mixed-use residential next to the avenues, and in general, I'm trying to put commercial and offices and stuff like that near the center of the grids, and then on the outside, I'm going to have residential sort of spreading out. There's, I think, 6 zones in this pack. So there's, I think, medium density row houses. There is mixed use residential. There's medium density residential, and I think the mixed use is technically medium as well. Then there's high density residential. There's low density commercial, which is what I'm doing right now, and then you also have the high density offices. I didn't end up using low density commercial too much, just because the low density thing doesn't really fit as well in a high density city like this one, but it does work really nicely on the outskirts of the city. You can see I'm also using it here along the avenues. It was good for those kind of irregularly shaped zones. For residential, I'm trying to follow that height gradient as well. So, I have the highest density stuff in the middle, then medium density around that. Then only on the very outskirts do I have the row houses. Now here you can see me doing the row houses, and I made a mistake here actually, because I didn't realize that the plot sizes for the row houses were actually quite small. I think they're like 1x4 is the maximum size. So when I zoned these big grids, it actually ended up with a lot of empty space in the middle. So you'll actually see me later fixing all the grids that the row houses are on and subdividing them so that the plots can fit nice and densely. But anyways, I think it's time. We've zoned everything out. We have all our infrastructure. Everything's connected up. So there's nothing left to do but unpause the game and I guess watch people move in. Man, I love that moment. It's so cathartic seeing everything grow into all the work you've just put in. I don't know, to me it's always kind of like that one person who always wears glasses, but then they take them off. Still the same person, but they look completely different. And I feel like that's kind of the same here. Right off the bat, we had a couple problems that I went to fix. So we only had this one, well, I guess there's 2 substations technically, but they're in one location, and they were getting bottlenecked pretty badly by all the buildings that just grew in. So I did some work to alleviate that by just adding some more interconnections. Later on, you'll see me adding additional substations across the city as well, so that all the power isn't coming in just through these 2. Now, like most of you, I was very curious about the traffic. So here you can see that stack interchange I was talking about, and it's pretty light. As we move down, the diamonds are staying pretty clear. We already have a taxi along there. Then you come down to here, and it's quite a mess. I can't say I didn't expect it. I knew it would be a bit of a rush, but I guess we'll have to see if this is just something that'll alleviate with time, just because if this is all the people moving in, or if it's always going to be like that. Spoiler alert, I can answer that right now. It's always going to be like that. I was never able to get that fully resolved, but I will be fixing that up a little bit later just to help it. We immediately got a ton of people using the subway, which was nice. And I'm just kind of checking out all the different highways and just seeing if they're getting used or not. And the answer is, yeah, they were. If you build it, they will come. And in this case, that held true. This coastal one didn't get a lot of usage immediately, like I mentioned earlier, but it will later when we build the other highway to the industrial area, which we still haven't covered. The sunken diamonds here aren't too bad, but later on, actually, I think this becomes the most congested part of the city, which was unfortunate, but it is what it is. This one is right now, you can see the level of congestion there. I know to some of you this is probably like a war crime, just seeing that, but honestly, I don't really care that much. Maybe that's a bad thing to say, but it is what it is, and honestly, you're always going to have traffic, so it's not completely unrealistic. But these trains, you can see how many people were using them, and I was very happy to see the amount of people using them. I think every train coming in from the northern connection, whatever that city was called, was always full. It was always at capacity at like 600 or 800 people. And I have a subway station there, and a ton of people were using it. Like, that's what I was saying. The subways immediately got a ton of usage. But we also ended up with this mass migration of people walking on foot. So we'll have to modify those intersections a little bit later. I realized though that I forgot to do garbage services, so I put down 2 of these recycling plants on our little service island over here, which is nice. It's right downtown, so it can reach the rest of the city pretty easily. Right away I upgraded them with the extra depots so that we can have more vehicles, since by this point I was realizing how many people were going to be in the city. Now back to this intersection, it was bothering me, so I wanted to fix it. And the way I did that is just by splitting the border road from the actual off-ramp. And basically what this did is made sure that instead of having to go through 2 intersections, so first with the border road and then with the actual city road there, cars would just have to go through one. So they'd just go right into the city grid system. And again, at this point, I'm just going around and fixing shit. I mean, it's always when you do something like large scale like this, there's things you didn't realize. And one of the things I mentioned are these row houses from earlier. So you can see here in the top left how dense those homes are up there versus in like the bottom left. So that's the difference, and that's what I had to fix. So this does require a little bit more work because you have to zone the different plots sort of like one by one, like I'm doing here, so that you don't have buildings, for example, going from the side versus just from the top and bottom like I have here. So that makes sure we have everything in the proper orientation. I ended up subdividing all the row house blocks into 3, basically. So there's 2, I guess technically 4 rows of 1x4s. So those are on the top and bottom. And then in the middle, we have 2 rows of 1x3s. But the zones actually go down to as small as 1x2 in case you need those. And yeah, I suppose I could have left them as is, but I just really didn't like how sparse it was. It really was a lot of wasted space, and doing it this way it felt like it fit the city so much more. So yeah, and then once we have the trees later on, it'll make it feel even more dense. So I think it was a good idea. Okay, now at this point I was noticing that, sure do have a lot of dead people notifications. So I went around and I upgraded the crematoriums with a bunch of extras. So there's the incinerators that should hopefully help speed them up a little, plus a bunch of new garages so that we have a greater vehicle capacity. Unfortunately to say, I don't think that helped us too much in the long run. Once I had gone around and patched up all the immediate problems, I was then looking at the sort of happiness monitor on the bottom right and just seeing what citizens were complaining about. So the biggest one at the time was unreliable post service. I think it was like minus 12 points or something like that. And honestly, I completely forgot that the post service was even a thing. So that was the next thing I did. I put down this big mail sorting facility in this area by the Stack interchange and just got to work at establishing that service throughout the city. If I'm not mistaken, the big post-sorting facility sort of handles mail from outside the city, so kind of like just stores mail. Then these post offices are actually what sends them out and distributes it across the city. So I put down a couple of these with a bunch of extra depots so that we'd have all the mail trucks we needed. And after that, it's just putting down a bunch of mailboxes around the city. So I don't really have a concrete plan for how I put these down, but again, I'm just putting down where I think coverage is needed and hoping that it's enough. Now, after mail, another big complaint was internet, so that was the next thing on my list. I put down this telecom building from the Modern Architecture Pack. It fits really nicely downtown with all the offices, so that's what I used there. It actually kind of reminds me of that AT&T building from, I think it's in New York, the big windowless building. So that was a cool one to have, and being right downtown, it gives us good internet coverage for all our citizens. And then I added a couple of these extra telecom antennas as well. And then again, moving down the list. The next thing was lack of entertainment, which made sense because I didn't put down any monuments or parks yet. So I decided that this would be a perfect time to take a look at the signature buildings. So I don't remember how many signature buildings there are exactly in this pack, but it's more than enough to spice up the city. And the first one I put down was this really nice clock tower. I had this weird triangular plot of land that I needed to put something onto, and this was perfect. And it's this really, really nice building. There's actually a couple of, I think they're either residential or office buildings that are in the same style, and you can put down right next to them. But that was great to have there. And the next one I put down was, however the hell you pronounce the name of this one, I'm not even going to try. But it's like an inn or something. It's another corner building. It's really nice. So I put it down in this commercial zone here. But the signature buildings have nice benefits to them. They have some perks, I think, but they aren't necessarily for leisure or entertainment. So for that, you really need some tourist attractions or monuments or parks. So one that I wanted to put down was this, I think it's the Museum of Modern Art. I believe it's from modern architecture, but it fit perfectly in this weird plot of land I had there that, again, I just didn't know what to put. So it was perfect, and it took up the necessary amount of space. And then after that, I just kind of went around the city adding parks that the citizens could actually go to. I had this empty plot of land in the northern row houses where I messed up and it was like the wrong size, but I kept it because I thought it would be great for a park, actually, and it was. So I put down this plaza and then a bunch of these, I think they were long covered parks or something like that, but they were perfect. And after that, again, I'm just going around and seeing where I have room. So here I had this unused plot of commercial land where I just put this big park down. I had also intentionally left empty this other big tract of land up by the coast for something, like a central park or something. So here I put down some sports parks because it was really the only area in the city I could fit them without destroying a bunch of houses, and I was trying to avoid that where I could. It needed a little bit of terraforming, but I think it ended up working out pretty well. I'm going to come back to these later and add some paths and like parking and stuff like that. But for now, I'm just roughing in where I wanted them to be. And while we were doing all of that, our city has actually grown by quite a lot. So you can see we're just about reaching 145,000 people. And I decided it was time to work on the traffic a little bit. All the incoming trains were pretty much at capacity because of all the people moving in. So I increased the amount of vehicles on those lines by a little bit. I think I increased it more later, but for now, I think I bumped it up by like 1 or 2. I also decided that this was the right time to tackle the buses, so I put down a little bus terminal over there, which is also modern architecture, so it fits the same style as the train station. And then I'm just going around and creating my bus lines. So I put all of these down in areas that aren't currently covered by the subway, or at least the subway isn't nearby. So that's just sort of going outside of it, but I'm still trying to have connections with the buses here and there. But this line in particular, just sort of going out beyond where the subway is, and it's coming back around to the train station. I did quite a lot of that. Not all of the buses end at the train station, but a lot of them do. But I also added some inner city buses. So just like we have the trains going to our city connections, I also added some buses that would be able to ferry people back and forth. And I think there's a total of 3 highway connections on the map, or I guess outside connections. So we ended up having 3 intercity bus lines. I was also realizing that our roads were getting quite worn down, so I put down 2 of these road maintenance buildings, and I tried to put them near access to the highways, since it was pretty important that those get maintained to keep the traffic flow going well. I really like the road maintenance vehicles in this game, because you can actually watch them sort of go around and they'll do like a quick little stop and then fix up a section of the road. So I really should have had these going from the start so that there wasn't so much work for them to do right away. But I think in the end it was fine. But yeah, another service that I forgot I needed to have. And parking, that was another one too. In my European city, in Mrieslava, I don't really have that much parking because I try to keep everything very walkable and transit oriented. Then here I realized, oh wait, this is an American city, there should be parking everywhere. So I put down a ton of these multi-level parking garages to handle most of that volume. And then later on I went around and I added some additional parking lots and parking lot roads as well. I mentioned monuments earlier, and I thought it was just about time for one. And it turns out that this little fountain park fits perfectly within the spiral we have from the Golden Gate Bridge. So obviously I couldn't pass on that opportunity, and I did stick it in there, you know, if the shoe fits. It's definitely very gimmicky, won't deny that. I don't know how many people would actually want to go to a park like this surrounded by 5 billion cars going down a 6-lane highway, but it looks cool. So that was my main criteria for this. The last really major build that I wanted to do is an industrial area. And we have this other island that wasn't really being used. And I did build a bridge there. So I think it was kind of set up perfectly for us to do that. I'm sure you guys are sick of looking at me building highways by now, so I'll skip through most of this. But yeah, I was just pulling a highway through this and connecting it up to the one that already ran through the map. Instead of doing 2 parallel 2-lane roads, I decided to switch to just a single 4-lane highway for most of the stretch there. Again, that was just to keep things compact and also just to change things up a little. Because initially I wanted to have that highway intersect with just the industrial roads directly. So instead of doing interchanges, and you'll see me doing that in just a second, but that ended up being a bad idea. So even though I did this to be able to connect it directly to the industrial roads, I did end up having to grade separate it anyways. Technically speaking, I don't think we really needed an industrial area, but if you speak technically, we didn't need this city at all because it's infinite money. But again, we're just building something that looks nice. We're trying to build a full city, and an industrial area is part of that. My other hope was by adding this highway connection here, we'd also be reducing traffic from all the other highway connections we have, and I think it did help a little bit. And again, having the industrial area here, even though we're not really going to make a profit from it. When I did check if we're, making a profit or we're losing money, we were actually making money by the end of this. And I think the industrial area really contributed to a lot of that. I added the incinerator plant to here as well. It's a nice, very cool looking, big industrial building. And it would also help our garbage services out a little bit while also producing electricity. So it's kind of a win-win. It does produce a little bit of pollution, but it is what it is. I think it's actually not too bad. It's pretty reasonable. But yeah, it just fit really nicely, and it's a good distance away from the city. So I think this was a pretty good location for it. So yeah, unfortunately, was not able to get the hang of the death wave. But if I'm completely honest, I don't think it's my fault. If you look in the top left, we were having something like 56,000 deaths per month, and I think it actually peaked at like 80 or 90,000, while all the crematoriums, even with all the upgrades, like what I'm doing right now, could only do about like 1,000 or 1,100 deaths a month. I was using the infinite demand mod so that I could zone everything out right away, but apparently it's unsupported by this version of the game, and I think that's also the reason why I ended up having a lot of those empty city blocks where just buildings didn't grow in, like all those offices, I barely had anything grow in, and a lot of the commercial areas as well. So yeah, I'm really not sure what happened there, but I think it's related to how many people are dying. The other reason I think it's a bug is because I mean, come on, 80,000 deaths a month. It just doesn't make any sense. We have a population of, almost 200,000. And so what? That's the entire population getting refreshed every 2-3 months. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. I'm 90% sure it's some kind of bug, probably with infinite demand. So it's probably my fault. But either way, I just figured, whatever, I do the best I can and try to ignore that. It does bring us down by like a point or so on the citizen happiness scale, but I think they'll just have to deal with it. Beyond upgrading the crematoriums, I also upgraded our clinics and the hospital just to increase the capacity there. I also went to the schools because the elementary schools, of course, filled up, like I said they would. And I also put down these colleges because we had a lot of college demand and we just didn't have any college or university in the city. I also put down the Imperial State Building, which I think is my favorite building out of the whole Northeast pack. It looks super cool. I love how, I don't know if imposing is the right word, but it's just such a cool structure, and I think it really makes such a good impact on the city's skyline. And once I'd done that, I just placed down a bunch of offices myself because I don't want to have these empty city blocks here. I really wanted it to look nice and dense, so I just used Find It for that and did it manually. At this point, I came back to our central but not central park here, and I just added a bunch of paths so that people could walk around it. If this was like a regular series episode, I would have been more detailed with it and maybe made like a custom park or something, but in this case, that's again not what we were doing. So put down a bunch of paths and then I'll fill it out with some trees later. Now here's the parking I mentioned earlier as well. I'm putting down these, I think they're solar panel covered parking lots. I was actually really surprised by the amount of different parking lots we have in the game. I just haven't used them at all, so I didn't even know. But yeah, there's a good variety, so you can pretty much find a parking lot for any occasion. I tried to put a bunch of these around the city to help fill it out, and also that people had a place to park. You can see I did some parking lot roads there earlier, and yeah, I just kind of went around adding parking lots where I thought they were needed. And I didn't forget about the beach. So the first thing I did is I went along and I dragged out a bunch of alleys, so they would look like piers or something jutting out from the water. Yeah, I really wasn't too detailed here. Would have been nice to have boats or something, or like actual marinas, but I think this was fine just for a visual thing. After that, with Road Builder, I made a custom version of the 2-lane highway here, so that we would have zoning enabled on the side. And then what that let me do is just zone some sparse properties along it. So I ended up using the beach properties DLC for that, since it was kind of perfect. It is a paid DLC, but like I said, the buildings fit what we're doing here perfectly. And then I also added a couple of little commercial spots in a couple locations. And really, that's all of the building. So to me, the thing that ties everything together is putting down the trees, since it makes everything look a little bit more natural and filled out. So that's just what I'm doing here, going around. I start with very dense clusters, and then I'll go around with a sparser brush to sort of go around them. But inside the city, I basically turn off anarchy, make a really big brush, and I just slowly drag it along so that the tree finding algorithm will find all the empty spots and have time to fill it out between all the different houses there. I really think this did a lot. It looks much better with the trees. It really does give it a lot more character, I think. And now it was just time for a couple finishing touches. The first thing I did is upgrade these border roads along the sunken highways to have some trees and grass, I guess just to hide those highways a little bit. I don't know if trees actually provide any noise cancellation, but that was the idea, apart from just sight lines. I also ended up making some districts. I didn't do this from the beginning because I didn't really know what the city would look like, but now that I do, I just kind of drag this out. It doesn't really have any purpose other than just splitting the city up visually. So yeah, I went around and I did that. The city doesn't have a name, so I think I called some places like Upper Town and Lower Town, but I think you guys get the idea. I learned earlier while looking at the water tower that you could actually upgrade it with a couple of different designs. So obviously I had to finish off the build by using one of those. All right, so that's our northeastern one-take city. And I figure before we go any further, let's just do a quick time lapse of the build. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed that quick little time lapse. Honestly, I'm really happy with how this went. The city's definitely not perfect, but I did the best I could, and I think for the time I put into it, it turned out pretty well. Obviously this video is sponsored, but I think the Northeast pack really is a nice expansion, and it definitely gives the city most of its character. If I did something like this again, and honestly, I think I will. I'd probably do something on a much smaller scale. Building a full city like this was awesome, but there was just way too much to manage. The death rate issue does kind of piss me off, but yeah, I genuinely have no idea what's happening there. I think I'm going to upload the city to Paradox Mods if you'd like to check it out for yourself. Never done anything like that before, so I don't know how it'll go, but I don't know. Maybe some of you can fix the problems I'm leaving it with. And honestly, if you do, I'd love to see it. Leave a comment or at me on Blue Sky or something. I'll take a look. Or if you want to build your own 90k deaths per month city, you can get the US East Coast region pack for free from Paradox Mods today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.